apologies and desperate pleas, seeking forgiveness and avoiding consequences. Hank arrives at the police station to find his mother, Mrs. Brown, in a state of distress. She has fallen off a chair and appears weak, struggling to stand on her own. Concerned for her well-being, Hank rushes to her side and helps her sit down, questioning what has happened. As Hank tends to his mother, he notices her complicated expression as she stares at Liberty, his ex-wife. Chelsea, on the other hand, stands shocked with a pale face and a dropped jaw. Jessica, who has accompanied Hank, directs her attention toward Liberty planning to confront her. Jessica believes that Liberty is divorced, she should not have frightened her former mother-in-law. However, Jessica is taken aback by the presence of Elisa. She recognizes her famous figure known for her association with Zachary. She's envious of Elisa's perceived entitlement to pursue Zachary. Intrigued, Jessica approaches Elisa and asks if she is indeed Miss Stone. Elisa responds with haughty arrogance, lifting her chin and questioning Jessica's identity. Jessica excitedly introduces herself as Jessica Yates, the secretary to the manager of Waltham Electronics, and offers her business card. However, Elisa dismisses Jessica with disdain, accusing her of being a homewrecker who destroyed Liberty's marriage. Jessica is left speechless and embarrassed, withdrawing her arm in humiliation. Meanwhile, Hank realizes from Liberty and his sister's bruised appearances that they have been involved in a physical altercation. Suspecting that his mother and sister instigated the fight, Hank takes immediate responsibility and apologizes to Liberty on their behalf. He expresses his remorse, vowing to reprimand his mother and sister and ensure they never bother Liberty again. Hank is willing to fulfill any demands Liberty may have, motivated by the fear that his family members could end up in jail. Recognizing the need to resolve the family dispute, the police officers present encourage a peaceful resolution. However, the tension escalates when Mrs. Brown falls to the ground, this time on her knees, and confesses her wrongdoing to Liberty. She expresses deep remorse, believing she deserves punishment and even begs for forgiveness. Mrs. Brown goes so far as to bow earnestly in a sincere plea for absolution. Yet Liberty, carrying her son, turns away and refuses the gesture, rejecting her mother-in-law's pleas. Mrs. Brown continues to berate herself, insisting she deserves to die for her actions. In a shocking act of self-inflicted violence, Mrs. Brown raises her arm and slaps herself, causing Hank to swiftly intervene and prevent any further harm. Coming out of her shocked state, Chelsea, Liberty's sister-in-law, joins her mother on her knees and pleads with Liberty. She takes responsibility for her actions, acknowledging that she twisted the facts and physically assaulted Liberty. Chelsea appeals to their long-standing relationship of over a decade and emphasizes her role as Sonny's aunt. She implores Liberty to forgive both her and Mrs. Brown, highlighting the negative impact their incarceration would have on Sonny, who would have a grandmother and aunt with criminal records. Hank finds himself caught in the middle as both his mother and sister struggle to stay on their feet. Despite Hank's warnings, his family continues to cause trouble and refuses to listen to him. Hank is also dealing with pressure at work and fears that his family's actions may jeopardize the $1 million deal he made with Liberty to secure his job. Sonny, witnessing the drama, clings to his mother and avoids looking at his grandmother and aunt. Duncan, who is standing nearby, catches Sonny's attention. Despite his intimidating appearance, Duncan is fond of children and tries to reach out to Sonny. However, the young boy becomes frightened and calls out for his mother. Liberty reassures Sonny and introduces him to Duncan, explaining that he is not a bad person. Sonny remains cautious and seeks comfort from Serenity, asking for hugs from his aunt. Apologies and promises are offered by the Browns, who have arrived at the police station. They express their willingness to pay for damages in the hope that Liberty will drop the matter. Liberty agrees to let the incident go, but she insists that Mrs. Brown and Chelsea put their promise in writing, apologize, and compensate her for medical expenses and emotional distress. Liberty specifically requests that the compensation come directly from the pockets of Mrs. Brown and Chelsea, not from Hank. After settling matters at the station, Liberty apologizes to Mrs. Stone and decides to take Sonny home instead of going to her aunt's place. Serenity offers to drive Liberty home, as she is not in the mood to have dinner with the Stones after the day's events. Mrs. Stone understands and invites them to stay at her place over the weekend. Once the Stone and Hunt sisters leave, Mrs. Brown emerges from the police station with her son's assistance. Hank confronts his mother and sister, asking them to stop causing trouble for Liberty. He explains that they are divorced and no longer have any connection to each other. However, Mrs. Brown insists that Hank should not have divorced Liberty and suggests that he win her back and remarry her, citing Liberty's connection to the Stone group through her aunt. Hank and Jessica are left speechless by Mrs. Brown's unexpected suggestion. Serenity returns home to find the house dark and wonders if her grandmother, Nana, is asleep. She turns on the lights and locks the door behind her. Wanting to give the impression that there is a man in the house, she places a pair of Zachary's loafers at the front door as a safety measure. Mrs. Lane, their housekeeper, comes out of her bedroom and informs Serenity that Nana has gone back home. Nana had moved in with Serenity due to a fight she had with Zachary, but now that they have made up, she decided to return to her own house. Nana was likely avoiding being seen by the Stones until Zachary confesses the truth to Serenity. Serenity is surprised by this and explains to Mrs. Lane that their dinner plans were cancelled due to a conflict at the police station involving her sister, Liberty, and her former in-laws, the Browns. Mrs. Lane expresses concern for Liberty and wonders why the Browns won't leave her alone since she has already separated from them. Serenity remarks that the Browns couldn't handle getting nothing after Liberty trashed their house and they thought they could bully her just because they were mean-spirited. Serenity reflects on how deceptive and pretentious the Browns are, emphasizing the importance of women knowing their partner's family before getting married. Serenity asks Mrs. Lane for her opinion, expressing her worries about Zachary ending up like Liberty's ex-husband, Hank. She questions whether Zachary's feelings for her could change, even though he is good to her now. Serenity states that if Zachary were to cheat on her like Hank did to Liberty, she would not bother arguing and would immediately proceed with a divorce. She believes that her husband would be tainted if he were involved with another woman and declares her readiness to leave the marriage in such a situation. Mrs. Lane assures Serenity that Zachary is different from her sister's ex-husband, Hank. She describes Zachary as a responsible and loyal person who doesn't easily get close to other women. Mrs. Lane believes that Zachary's upbringing in a committed and faithful family environment has shaped his values. She advises Serenity to communicate openly with Zachary and understand his perspective in order to build trust and maintain a lasting marriage. Serenity reflects on Zachary's reliability and sense of responsibility, comparing him to Hank. She acknowledges that their marriage will last as long as Zachary remains faithful and honest with her. She vows to understand and support him, creating an environment of trust where he can openly communicate with her. Mrs. Lane plans to persuade Zachary to come clean about whatever he has been hiding once he returns from his business trip. Serenity will only become angrier the longer he keeps the truth from her. Serenity then prepares for bed and sends Zachary a text message, referring to him as a hot water bottle. Zachary, who has been eagerly waiting for a message from her, calls her in response. Serenity receives a late-night call from Zachary. Their conversation is filled with lighthearted banter, but Zachary expresses discomfort with being called a hot water bottle. Serenity explains that she thought of him because she was feeling cold and wanted his warmth. They playfully tease each other, and Serenity promises to send him a goodnight gift. The tone becomes more serious when Zachary asks about the DNA test results with Mrs. Stone. Serenity reveals that Mrs. Stone is her aunt and they are related by blood. Although Zachary feels a pang of disappointment, he congratulates Serenity on finding her family. Serenity expresses her disbelief at having a sudden end in her life and wonders if it's all a dream. They briefly discuss Nana's return to the family home and Serenity reassures Zachary that she won't cheat on him. Zachary tells Serenity that she has changed him and he loves her. Serenity bids goodnight and teases to talk to him in her dreams. Zachary, however, feels insecure, sensing that Serenity may not have fully embraced her feelings for him despite getting intimate. Zachary receives a call from his friend Duncan late at night. Duncan informs him that Serenity has an aunt, who turns out to be Mrs. Stone. He reveals that Mrs. Stone has been searching for Serenity's mother-in-law, suggesting that the two are related. Duncan speculates whether Zachary had prior knowledge of this connection when he treated Clive to a meal, attempting to patch up their relationship. Zachary feels embarrassed and frustrated that Duncan seemed to have read his thoughts. He clarifies that he invited Clive and his party to the meal simply to showcase the quality of their hotel, without prior knowledge of the familial connection. However, Zachary had a hunch that Mrs. Stone's sister might be his deceased mother-in-law. Duncan expresses concern about the potential consequences of Elisa, who has been infatuated with Zachary for years, discovering his relationship with Serenity. He worries that Elisa's explosive personality could lead to trouble for Serenity. Zachary requests that Duncan speak more tactfully, but Duncan defends his straightforward nature. They discuss the complex dynamics between Serenity's family and the Stone group, acknowledging that only one of them can prevail in the business world. Duncan raises concerns about Serenity's reaction upon discovering the truth, and Zachary asserts that he can handle the situation himself. The conversation takes a turn when Duncan informs Zachary that Serenity's former mother-in-law and sister-in-law caused trouble at the office. Zachary becomes upset that Serenity didn't inform him about the incident, feeling as though she doesn't consider him part of her family. Duncan realizes that he may have caused trouble between Zachary and Serenity by revealing information about Serenity's sister to Zachary. He tries to call Zachary again, but it goes to voicemail as Zachary has put the call on hold. Duncan wonders if Zachary will confront Serenity about the matter. Meanwhile, Serenity is still awake when Zachary calls her again. She hesitates to answer, feeling the cold in Zachary's room. Eventually, she picks up and notices a change in Zachary's tone. He questions why she didn't tell him about the fight between her sister and former mother-in-law, expressing disappointment that she didn't consider him family enough to share such important news. Serenity is taken aback by Zachary's reaction and defends herself, stating that the fight between her sister and former mother-in-law is a recurring issue and something they can handle themselves. She explains that she didn't intentionally keep it from him and that even if she had told him, he wouldn't have been able to come back and help. Serenity emphasizes her independence and self-reliance, which leads Zachary to accuse her of not regarding him as family. Frustrated, Serenity points out that Zachary himself hasn't shared everything with her, including details about his hometown. She argues that he is being petty and overly sensitive, expecting her to depend on him for everything. Serenity asserts her strength and refusal to be a weak person who constantly needs help. She tells Zachary that if he wants a wife who relies on him entirely, she cannot fulfill that role. Zachary is left speechless as Serenity stands her ground, reminding him to consider his own actions and expectations. Serenity reflects on her decision to rely on herself rather than others, even if it means not being completely dependent on Zachary, her husband. She has seen her sister's failed marriage and believes that it is better to be self-reliant. When Zachary questions her about not sharing certain information with him, Serenity accuses him of being short-tempered and self-centered, expressing her frustration with his behavior. Zachary, feeling hurt by Serenity's words, hangs up the phone abruptly. Serenity is surprised by his reaction and throws her phone on the table, expressing her indifference towards his anger. She questions whether he expects her to share every detail of her life with him when he doesn't do the same. She finds his double standards ridiculous and feels suffocated by his domineering nature. Unable to sleep due to the tension between them, Serenity picks up her phone again and sends Zachary a message, but he doesn't respond. Frustrated, she throws the phone away, considering him petty for ignoring her messages. Although she tries to convince herself that she doesn't care, she remains restless and unable to find peace as she tosses and turns in bed. Serenity, feeling angry and frustrated after her argument with Zachary, decides to move back to her own room and packs her belongings accordingly. She is determined not to sleep in Zachary's bed anymore. Meanwhile, Zachary is still sulking and feeling hurt by Serenity's accusations. He receives her message but chooses to ignore and deletes it. He paces back and forth in his office, feeling annoyed and upset. He tries to calm himself down by making a cup of coffee and focuses on his work, planning to work through the night. As Serenity lies in bed, her anger gradually subsides. She realizes that it's not worth getting mad at him every time he acts this way. She decides to let go of her anger and eventually falls asleep. Serenity believes that Zachary's jealousy is unfounded and that he is being unreasonable in expecting her to share everything while he doesn't do the same. She reflects on the incident with her aunt and the Brown family, realizing that it was her sister's decision to reconcile, and she respected that. The next day, Zachary continues to work tirelessly, channeling his anger into his work. His high work efficiency leads his colleagues to work overtime, causing complaints in the company. Serenity wakes up late, feeling unwell with a headache and sore eyes. Mrs. Lane has already taken care of the morning routine, and Serenity greets her before realizing the time. She realizes she needs to pick up Sunny and wonders if her sister is going to work. Despite not feeling well, Serenity prepares herself to start the day and fulfill her responsibilities. Serenity finds out that her sister has sent Sunny to the store and they don't need to visit her new place. Mrs. Lane prepares sandwiches and black coffee for Serenity's breakfast. Serenity takes a photo of the coffee and sends it to Zachary, but he doesn't reply, leaving her frustrated. Mrs. Lane offers to make different sandwiches for Serenity in the future and they sit down to eat and chat. Serenity asks Mrs. Lane if she thinks Zachary is overbearing and self-centered, as he demands that people don't hide anything from him. Mrs. Lane is unsure why Serenity is asking but listens attentively. Serenity explains that she had a quarrel with Zachary the previous night and they are now in a cold war. Mrs. Lane is surprised that they are already having another dispute. Serenity shares the reason for their argument. She had sent Zachary a message and they briefly talked on the phone before she ended the call because she didn't want to disturb him. She didn't mention her sister's fight with her ex-in-laws. Serenity suspects that Duncan might have mentioned it to Zachary, leading him to question why she didn't tell him. She feels that he accused her of not treating him like family. Serenity mentions the bitter coffee and wonders where Mrs. Lane bought it, thinking it suits Zachary's taste. She expresses her frustration with Zachary, mentioning the prenuptial agreement he made her sign and his mistrust towards her motives for marrying him. She also mentions that she doesn't even know where his family's home is despite being married to him. Mrs. Lane listens silently, unable to respond to Serenity's grievances. She realizes that there are trust issues and misunderstandings between the couple and hopes they can find a way to resolve their conflicts. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Voice Novel, and follow Voice Novel on Facebook, so you will get notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Thank you.